Okay, I'm going live. I'm making you the host, and I'm going to go join Margarita's review.
Yep.
Was
it working today? The YouTube live?
Yeah, I was tuning in.
Good.
The work looked great.
Thanks. Cheers.
Great, Sam.
Bye. All right. Little early. It's still have two. Well, no, it's 2 o'clock. Good afternoon, everyone. Probably need to wait for maybe a few more minutes for everyone to show up. But it's great to see you. Patty, thanks for joining us. Great to see
Hi,
you.
thanks for having me.
You're
Pleasure.
welcome. Wonderful. And Rami, good to see you. Thank you. And of course, Kevin joined us. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, everybody. How you doing?
Good, thank you. We'll do a brief, I prepared an introductory slideshow. So with that, I will do definitely introduce critics and details. Scott, I thought you were joining us in the morning.
I thought I was with you in the afternoon.
Oh, okay, great. Well, nice to have you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And Dean Aldi, thank you for coming.
Hey, thank you.
Dan Eckenrode is joining us. He was already in that morning session already. And
Hi,
thanks
everybody.
for joining us again.
And Quintero, I do have to tell you at 3 o'clock I am going to have
Yeah.
to jump off. Okay, so I should be able to hopefully get through at least the first one, maybe the first two.
Yep. And Ben just came on. Hi, Ben. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay, so let me get this going here, and I'll share a screen. And one thing is, okay. When I share a screen, for some reason, everybody, there is the video screen essentially is gone. So I can't see you guys, but bear with me. Can you see the moving image?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
good, thank you. Okay, so it's a drone image of the site, but we'll move on here. Everyone, thank you for joining us for the session 2, the afternoon session. We have our critics today in the afternoon is Patty Hayda, Associate Professor at WashU. Patty is first and foremost our alum and an urban designer, architect, artist, educator, and author. She studies politics and design in American cities with a focus on contemporary erasure urbanism, displacement, and the normalized process reproducing intense inequity. Patty's scholarship fuses creative drawing, mapping, and formal design practices with planning, history, critical urban theory, law, and political economy to depict sites according to the reality of forces shaping them. So Patty, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. You didn't have to read all that, but that's
well, you know,
Thank you.
it's really nice to have you. And I think it gives everybody the background of why you're here and what kind of things you may be discussing. So next up is Kevin Centani, Board of Directors at Friends of the Lafitte Greenway. Friends of the Lafitte Greenway is a community-driven nonprofit organization that works in partnership with the city and the community to ensure the Greenway develops into a safe, vibrant, and active park. Kevin is also an entrepreneur, inventor, and a hobbyist. For 25 years, his company, Controlled Entropy, have designed and produced hundreds of interactive experiences, museum exhibits, trade show displays, and electronic gadgets for clients worldwide. And Kevin also have interests including industrial archaeology, New Orleans history, pinball, trains, and infrastructure. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. And this is actually the first time this semester to engage the community. So please feel free to critique what we're doing, and maybe we can discuss in the future what we should be doing in the future. So again, thank you for joining us.
I'm happy to be a part of this. I saw this morning's presentations and they were beautiful. I look forward to this afternoon's. And just a little update, as everyone should know, the Greenway on Monday is unveiling a new public sculpture right at the intersection of the Greenway and Norman Francis Boulevard. And then starting next Wednesday, a week from tomorrow, we're doing something called Supernova, which is our sort of fundraiser and nighttime lights and video and projections and LED festival. So there's activity going on out there. There's placemaking going on. So as I looked at all the work that the students have done here, I'm beginning to help my imagination get filled in with all sorts of great ideas. So thanks.
Sounds like a social distanced event.
It is. It's very social distance. And just look, it's lafittegreenway.org/supernova. Check it out. Excellent.
Next up is Rami Diaz, associate designer, urban designer at Wagner and Ball Architects. Rami is also our alum and an expert on the history of New Orleans and its architecture, landscape, and water systems. Rami played a key role in the Dutch dialogues and the Greater New Orleans Urban Water Plan, one of our key readings in the studio. In his lecture, Rami gave us several wonderful lecture about living with water. He shared with us the philosophy and the latest storm water management strategies in the field. So Rami, thanks for joining us. Can you hear us? Rami, are you there?
Yeah, is it working okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yep. All right, thank you. And thanks for the promotion. I'm now an associate. That's great. News to me.
Okay, so Matt DeVos might join us later. He is the president of Jackson Precast and also a Tulane alum when we had a civil engineering program. He is on the board of the PCI Foundation at the national level and sponsoring the PCI Foundation studio at Mississippi State. He may or may not join us this afternoon. He already joined us in the morning, so we'll see. Next up, Dan Eckenrode, Executive Director of PCI Gulf South. Again, Dan's joining us tandem parallel this morning. For those of you who don't know, PCI stands for Precast Pre-Stressed Concrete Institute. Dan is an industry veteran and is our link to the industry allies. This semester, Dan introduced us to the basics of the precast retaining wall and permeable paving system. It was very, very helpful. Well, welcome again, Dan.
Thank you.
So now we have three of our most distinguished faculty. Iñaki is our dean, a former and co-founder of Alde Joubert Architecture and Landscape, an internationally known multidisciplinary research-based practice. It focuses on innovation, and it's particularly renowned for its leadership in a new approach to the relation between cities and rivers, in which the natural dynamics of flooding become part of the public space. And again, no need to say more. I think, Iñaki, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And I'll go to Ben. Ben Smith, Director of Graduate Architecture Program here at Tulane. Ben is a scholar, designer, and educator whose work locates advanced practices for architecture. His recent scholarship has centered on the disciplinary evolution of architecture through institutional and pedagogical developments in education. its view on architectural production negotiates design techniques and aesthetic sensibilities with the belief that architecture should engage the discipline with the rigorous theoretical conversation that influences present concerns. Thank you, Ben, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And I do have a blurb for Scott, but it's on another slide. We'd like to introduce Scott Bernard, our Associate Dean for Academics and longtime resident of New Orleans. Everything about, your interest has a lot to do with the regional climate and how we build in the city complex urban fabric, elevated housing and how that impacts community, and also social engagement aspect, community engagement aspect in building the environment. So
I think it's
thank
most
you.
appropriate to introduce me as the guy who can't read emails or teletype. Since I'm here for the wrong session, I apologize.
So back to the, sorry to do this. I prepared a quick sort of introduction to the studio. Our hunch is that through advanced design and fabrication techniques, the surface geometry of the precast system can be performatively and aesthetically aligned to the flow characteristics of water, mitigating flood and encouraging productive occupation of the ground plane. So at the component scale, the studio pushes the limits of the complex surface geometry the advanced fabrication techniques can afford, and its performative performance relative to water. Now, we've also been looking at the larger context, searching for opportunities to make an urban scale impact. One of the key data here, here in New Orleans, on average, we get about ½ an inch of rain over 24 hours every 3 days or so. However, lately, as you know, everybody knows, we have been experiencing a more frequent, intense rainfall, about ½ inch of rain over an hour or two. This is an equivalent to the 10-year storm intensity of 10-year storm, overwhelming our drainage system and leading to a significant flooding events, as you see here. As you see here, this is the typical sort of model 10-year storm, and the peak happens within about an hour, hour and a half, and the intensity is about 0.6 inch of rain over 24 hours. But that happens, it's compressed in hour, hour and a half. So that tells you something. So the obvious response to the frequent flood events are to, one, increase the size of the drainage system to move more water quickly, or decrease the peak demand of the drainage system by increasing the water detention capacity. What you see here is a network of New Orleans drainage system, and the Lafitte Greenway happens to be on the primary drainage route, parallel to the open drainage canal that happens over here. Locations and the capacity of the pumping stations are represented in the circle. So there's the pumping station number 2. I don't know what that number is. And then out into the Lake Pontchartrain. All the rain gets collected, follow this route out. The studio took the latter approach this semester with the help of our stormwater management expert, Brooke Morris, who joined us in the morning. We looked at the impact of diverting high flow stormwater from the St. Louis Drainage Canal and detaining it in the northern 1/3 of the Lafitte Greenway by controlled flooding. And I don't think I need to explain the diagram to you here, but this is here, the line in red is our site, so to speak. The canal's right next to it. We're looking towards downtown St. Louis cathedrals over here, CVDs in this area. The SWIM model, stormwater management model simulation and analysis, confirms a significant reduction of flooding upstream in the CVD and Lower Garden districts if we take this approach. Based on the analysis, approximately 450 cubic feet of stormwater needs to be diverted and detained to have an impact. And this is equivalent to a 1-inch excavation across the site, because the site that we're looking at is exactly around 450,000 square foot. And as an example, with a cut and fill strategy, it translates roughly to 3-foot excavation, 1/3 of the site, and 1.5-foot fill, 2/3 of the site. Note that the water table is high here at 4'6" below grade, and the soil is highly impervious. And just a little bit about forebay. Forebay is an infrastructure for controlled flooding to release the water slowly and evenly to mitigate erosion, improve water quality, and to promote the productive use of the site. Forebay is responsible for about 25% of the detention capacity, approximately 112,500 cubic foot. It is connected to the canal at 4'6" below grade, and the water in the forebay will rise simultaneously with the water level of the canal. The bottom of the forebay is at 7'6" below grade, allowing a minimum of 3 foot of groundwater all year around. So, at the site scale, our intervention focused on shaping the surface geometry of the ground plane to manage the occasional controlled flooding and the water detention, manage the normal store water runoff and improve water quality, develop the use and increase value of the Lafitte Greenway for the neighboring community, and to explore innovative use of precast to shape the program and the surface geometry of the ground plane. So with that, we'll start with Kat, and we'll see where she takes us. Kat, I'm going to stop sharing here.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Katharina Tomisato, and I want to say thank you for all of our guest critics that are here today. I do have all of my slides up in the concept board if you would like to follow along. I'm experiencing, I don't know if it's my computer or my internet, but I'm experiencing some delays, so I apologize in advance if there are some lags with my slides. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see my cover page?
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start us off with introducing you to the beginnings of our studio, and then going into the landscape intervention. So initially, we started working with, oh wait, let me go into full screen. Initially, we started with thinking about eccentric units, which were modular, and we were thinking about how light and water would interplay. We then moved on into vessels, once again thinking about how water would work within the design, and developed that further. And so here you can see my final vessel, which was really interested in how the full concrete would allow the water to flow from one part to the other. And then this eventually brought us
Looks like we lost you, Kat.
presentation.
There you go. Can you repeat that again a little bit? We lost you for a
Oh
second.
no. Oh no, I'm so
I think we lost you again there.
employed within the landscape intervention, and I'll go further into this later on in my presentation.
Yeah, Kat, we lost you again, and maybe you might want to turn your video off.
Oh no, okay. Hang on. I'm so sorry. Hang on, let me stop my video. Okay, can you hear me better now?
We can hear you now. We can't see your board shared a screen.
Okay. Okay.
There you go.
Okay, so let's just start with the landscape intervention. So here we have the Lafitte Greenway.
Are you sharing the right screen?
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes.
It looks like it's still buffering.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Try it again.
Okay. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Should I just try sharing it on the showing you on the concept board maybe?
Sure.
Instead of PDF? Okay. Wow, this is embarrassing. Sorry, y'all. Okay, can you see the concept board?
We can't.
Oh my gosh.
Are you sure you're sharing the right screen?
Yes, I'm sure I am.
Hey, Kat, would it be beneficial if one of us, do you want to send your presentation to one of us and we can share our screen while you talk? Do you think that would be easier on your Wi-Fi?
Maybe. I could also, if somebody wants to switch places with me, I could try to reset my router and not disrupt this too much more. Can everyone,
Okay.
did you hear
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's
so
see.
sorry.
Evan, are you ready?
Yeah.
Do you mind?
Sorry, Evan.
Not a worries.
Okay. Okay. All right. I'm going to try to figure this out. I'm so sorry. Thank you.
No worries. Let's set this full screen mode. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm sure Kat will have a great explanation to follow on kind of the backgrounds of the whole studio and the approach to how we've gone over this, but I'll give a kind of a brief introduction to my approaches and looking at the Liffey Greenway and what we're trying to solve. And as that we were explaining is what we're really trying to work with is renewal of the site, but retention of the water coming from the site and the canal. One of the questions that may come up is how we're dealing with the water runoff from the neighborhood, but sadly this is the high point, so that won't be addressed as much. But I'll talk about the three aspects as I was looking at the site with. And this is overall, so you can see it in the map as he explained. As Kentaro was explaining, we connect to Bayou St. John in one direction to the north, and to the south or towards the river as downtown and the Lafitte Greenway. The major aspects that I was looking on tackling was movement across the site, and that is both pedestrian movement and water movement. Currently, there's no transactional movement across the site. That canal is a complete barrier, and pedestrian movement is one directional as well. So water is just moving through the canal, not stopping, and pedestrian movement is doing the same. The other two aspects is just in the most basic sense, there's just two zones currently. For the most part, one side is entirely public and accessible, green space and a trail, and the other side is nearly entirely inaccessible currently due to some construction projects going on, but we want to address that inaccessibility to the site. And the last is the lack of biodiversity and zoning. So with the inaccessibility of construction, you basically have a grass area, some bioswales, in the former brake tag station, which is now moving to be a shelter, a public spot. So I'll kind of jump right into how I attacked this. What you're going to see here is the overall approach to the site that I had. And so the major aspects that you're seeing is one path that's moving across as a bike path, another meandering path that cuts through as a walking path. And those are both wide enough to be flexible for both, actually. And then a number of bridges that are able to connect paths and connect people on both sides. And then largely it's around two major aspects. One is the green space and the open available areas for people to enjoy as a park. And then these forebays. The forebay that was discussed previously is to hold water, but my attempt was, in order to slow the water down, was to pull the water perpendicular. So these pointing things are the forebays, which are pulling water out of the canal as the water rises, and then distribute it throughout the site. And I'll explain more as we go. But the basic attempts were to include some different ranges of activities. Down on one end, while you do have water retention, you have courts and more open fields for athletic sort of activities and high activities. The center around that shelter, I really tried to create a possible space for events, farmers markets, or a performance area with seating and a nice hardscape for that, or places where the community can host events. And then as we go along, there's more of these series of spaces that show up in these ellipses that are these high platforms of ground where gatherings can happen kind of out in nature, a little bit separate from the standard of the city. And so those are the major aspects. And so I zoomed in a little bit to show you the scale of humans here. It's a long site. It's not a very wide site, but it's 7 blocks long. So it's kind of hard to comprehend it all. So here you can see above the canal is a walking bike path that both crosses down to meet with the other one and continues along for people just traversing through it. And then these forebays, which are bringing water out into the site and into the greenery. And the greenery is this lower space that allows for a lot more water retention and kind of some separate zones within it. And so that's what I was focusing on. And then here's a zoom in of that ellipses of a more plinth area where people can gather and set up picnics, and larger groups and smaller groups, when that can happen, can gather. And diving into the sections a little bit, first is looking at how this forebay works. So within the forebay, this is cutting through. You have 3 different step-ups. One is always containing water, and that one's got a hard bottom. It's trying to collect some of the trash that's coming out from the canal and deal with the polluted water. But as the water rises, it'll step into the other zones that have plantings and eventually overflow into the site. And I'll explain that more as we go along. And that allows so that people, as they experience the water and as it comes onto the site, it's not full of trash, it's not full of dirt and other objects. So that's kind of your filtering process. And you can see how it interacts with the surface also along here. The step down into these areas is very gradual, but that being gradual in New Orleans actually is quite a bit. That's starting to get down to where the water level can be. And that's why one of the important facts is 3 feet of water here, that is always has water in it. And so that's constantly filtering the water within it. And then you can see as it connects to these open green spaces for more kind of activities, kids who want to come out and play some sports, pick up whatever it is. Here's an idea of how that plinth works in the ellipses that you've seen, and how it also relates to that biking, walking bridge that is sitting above so that it experiences both the site and the canal, but also is a constant way of getting through the site, even when there's been a lot of rainfall and other areas are flooded. And then here's how it interacts with that shelter that can open up to be markets or all sorts of great events. And a little detail is, before I get to the full development of this forebay, how it works is you can see at the lowest point, it's wide, and as it steps up into its different zones, it becomes more narrow, contains plantings, but also still rocks to help retain as much water volume as possible along the site. And that will be detailed out a little bit more. You'll see things like the seats that come into play. And so looking at contours, it's a very basic system of contouring. You have a walking path that steps down into it a little bit, but then plantings, how it works. The lower section is these marshes and grasses that are water absorbent, are great all year round. That area down there is not going to be accessible because there's always going to be remnants of the water there. But then as it steps up, there's emergent plantings and ornamental trees in these bands. So each band takes on a different sort of identity. More grasses and wild grasses at the next tier, shade trees for the walking path, and then a large area of just ground cover grass. You also are provided hills on one side and activities on the other. So it kind of creates two sides and allows the community to really activate the site themselves. And looking at how water works then is at normal, you always have water in the forebay and the canal. And then as a normal rain happens, you'll have runoff into that lower area. And that's about 87,000 cubic feet. And then at a worst case, or not worst, but 10-year storm condition, as the canal begins to flood, you'll have filling up the whole site 470,000 cubic feet. So just some quick views we can revisit later, but these are just some quick ideas of the experience there. You can see there's the walking path in this one with people able to kind of come right up to that forebay. I'll go back to the last one. And this is from that bike path, walking path, looking down on the site. And then a quick walkthrough again of how this system works with the water. As it comes in, here's the blue is the water that's always there and at 3 feet deep. And then as it fills up, it can start to take on the other areas. And then as it overflows, I have slotted 4 spots of overflow water to overflow to the site. We'll get into more details real quick there. So just quick overview of how we've done precast systems this semester. We talked about eccentric units. These were CMU type blocks working on light and water. And so mixing hard and soft shapes there. Same with this vessel for the water that we have done earlier in the semester, where I clearly defined that ellipses shape and used a hard edge to then define the water, which actually creates its own shapes. And so I was interested in that. And that brings me to the fabrication of this piece. So I explored through 3D printing some of these spaces and how they worked sectionally and 3-dimensionally with it. And here is the development, 3D printing, more experimenting with how these pieces work. And I'll explain it right here. So you have a module of 9-foot and 1-foot modules. They're about 8'8" and 8'2" tall. The one that's shorter, that is what's considered your weir. That's the controlled outflow spot. And at low flow moments, that's okay. And then as the water becomes more intense, it'll overtake the whole thing. And that's why you have a series of ribs, both structurally keeping it light, and then also for water overflow. But to make this system a little bit more interesting and more usable and variable, I created a sets of precast seat supports, and those can slide on top of this, fit right in. I'll show you that. And they'd be bolted in, and you would just simply have to add wood planks on top. And these can go anywhere along the site in really any configuration in order to create benches for people on the site. So the process of this was we had blue foam. We had CNC'd it and a small amount of sanding. And this is the unit I split the forebay into 2 pieces, a bottom and a footing, or top and a footing. This one has 3 pieces. So you have 2 sides and then the top cap, which you can see connected here, and all of them work together. We casted it, and this was before we stripped it. And then this was the bottom piece, which similar process. And then this was the resulting precast unit. This is at 1/4 inch scale, so it's just over 2 feet tall. Makes it not light at all. very realistic, but you see it both without any of the seat supports and then also with seat supports that fit in and actually worked well. And so that ledge helps give support as concrete's not great in all that tension stress. So that'll give it a little bit of compressive strength to it. And a couple more images. You could see how I've slotted down at the smaller scale. That slot actually became very small, but you could see the ridges of how this came together and the markings of the CNC and how they slotted together, and it was able to work on its own. But yeah, that's how I transcribed it from the large site down to the precast unit, taking from what we learned, and that's it.
Great, thank you. First person always gets lots of questions. You may start with kind of an overview clarification questions, or you can just step right in, ask tough questions to Evan.
I have an overview question.
Yes.
The channel where the canal is that where it is now? And was that part of the constraint that you were not to move that?
Yes, yeah. So that's an existing condition, and that's an important part of the drainage system from the downtown area and the French Quarter, and then it distributes to get the water. So all the water flowing through there is distributing throughout from the whole city.
No, I got that, but are you allowed to move it?
That was in our constraints as we left. We are leaving it. Yes.
Okay.
I have an overview question too. So is the walkway built sort of on top of the existing canal? Is that all sort of elevated walkway now?
Yes, and it's built on top, and that was kind of something we worked with. A big question is it structurally capable? And I'm sure you know, but we've been told that yes, it is structurally capable to handle a walkway. And this would also be great it's large enough, it could bring service things. So if there's issues with the forebay and the canal cleaning, service vehicles can actually use this bridge.
Well, it's very impressive, I have to say. I like the design of how you're using the water that's in the canal already. I think that's an interesting take on this project.
Thank you.
Evan, can you explain how water floods?
How it floods?
Yeah, so the water enters through, progresses through these spines, no?
Yes.
And when is the moment that the water jumps and fills the ground?
I'll use the earlier diagram or image. Once it's, well, there's a standard 3 feet, but once it's about 5 feet high within the base of the forebay, it then will start to flood over the edges. And then that can continue because one of the big issues is the canal. Let's go to a section. The canal will get really high. And so once it flows through, I have a series of openings into the forebay. It flows into here, and then that will flow out to the whole site. So that's the system of how it goes. Now, also there will be rain that's draining from the site. So there will be water within that site area prior to the overflow of the canal. Normal site runoff will still be held within the site as well.
So the water goes from the canal to the forebay, from the forebay to your fingers, and from the fingers to the retention area?
The forebay really is the fingers. So it's broken into multiple sections within each finger, but within that's what they are. So in that way, it kind of stopped the water flow isn't moving in the same direction as the canal anymore. It overflows, goes from the canal to these fingers, and from these fingers to the site.
And how it's drained?
It would drain. Then I would have a series of similar to bioswale and a pipe to collect as the water can go back down, which would then go back into the canal over time. The idea is it would try to absorb as much into the ground as possible. But as we know here, that's not really very much. So then that would then return to the canal when the pressures have lowered.
Can you go back to one of the overview drawings? The, like larger plan?
Yes, here, I'll bring you to the full site.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment about this, but then also the fingers themselves. And, you know, the contours don't need to be continuous through this plan. For simplicity, I can, you know, see doing it this way. But the nice thing about those fingers is that the individual landscapes between them can be all different, right? So I see there's a little bit of that in there, but you know, it could be a little bit freer if you wanted. But I'm curious about why the ripples are on the outside of the finger and not on the inside of the finger. If it's about the water and slowing the water and you know, dealing with that flow, it would seem like having the striations on the inside would help to break up the water flow and maybe give it a little bit more function. Then it seems somewhat decorative to me right now, as rendered.
Yeah, I think there's two good points. One, and I know we've discussed that previously, trying to vary within each of between the fingers, trying to give them a little bit more variation in that topography, and it's definitely something I wanted to pursue more in the time that since we've met. It's been mostly looking at that prefabrication, but I think I try to incorporate some of those ideas by bringing these kind of ellipses zones to cross over everything and create some variation. And in terms of the precast unit where the ripples are, it actually was derived from an original attempt to find a locking system for the bench supports to slide on. And so originally there was an intention of less ripply but more rigid, but based on the limitations of a CNC to make the precast unit, this was the result of it. So the ripples, we had discussed too, actually making both inside and outside, but it's just limitations.
Hey, Evan. This is a beautiful project. I mean, I just think it's really well developed and really well considered, and you know, just the level of completion I think is really commendable. I have a few questions, maybe. The first is probably not really that relevant to the infrastructure of the precast system, but when I'm looking at the renderings, I'm just curious what the people are doing. So yeah. I'm curious about that. Yeah. But then my second question is, and this is where, you know, I'm relatively naive about precast concrete systems, but one of the things that I think is somewhat clunky at the moment is the seat support. And I'm wondering if it's possible to instead have two 4-bay types, where one incorporates the seat system into it. And then as a design scenario, you can sort of, dependent on the environment or the location, you can pick and choose how those get sort of mobilized. And it just seems like one other sort of element would be incorporating the precast seat system or support into the concrete. Now, I don't know if that's possible or if that kills like the budget. Kentaro probably can tell you that. But it seems like that could be a neat opportunity to think about like a design moment. Yeah, but maybe, I don't know if you have a thought on the people. I mean, it looks like they're walking around in a marsh.
I have just a comment about that too. I mean, you know, I appreciate all these designs as well, but then I have to always think about my Greenway master plan that exists, that shows all sorts of activities that are in there that we, you know, constantly think about. And, you know, so like in this sort of thing, is there enough space to potentially put some things that are called for in the master plan, which is, you know, generically a dog park, a state park, you know, these types of things? Would those things fit somehow into something like that? Or are these people always just kind of walking in the marsh?
No, I agree with both of you entirely, and I think part of that's a result of choosing where to render from, and mostly was trying to show movement through the path. So the two paths were kind of, in this one at least, was the main focus. Was currently the main use of the site is kind of that movement through, and so I was trying to incorporate that. And then the other one is just a result of trying to represent how these things exist within it. But yeah, there would be possibilities for a lot more interest gatherings in the performance area or athletic areas. Yeah, dog park could easily be incorporated. There are definitely considerations that were tough to entirely represent here, and that's why it's kind of a generic people walking through it. It's more about the experiencing the site maybe at the beginning of the project where people haven't seen this and they get to come and walk about and be excited about. But maybe the long-term use is different.
Well, I'd be one of those people walking through the marsh, so I understand.
I want to build on that a little bit. If you can go back to your plan view, one thing I really appreciate is the filtering and the levels in the section. I love the subtlety of that, and I think it's a really beautiful idea that there's this gradual overflow, and it's like a gradient from this channel out to what you called the inaccessible side. And I think that same thinking would maybe serve you really well from this side in. Sorry, I have to annotate. I always have to talk with drawing, but like you're sort of establishing the gradient this way out, and I wonder about the other way around. Instead of these circles, if you might think about, especially occupying these zones, like what was just said, that there might be a dog park or, that they might have a gradient going this way, right? That you have the section might work in both ways in terms of where the high parts are and how they cut in, or the low parts cut across. And that might be programmatic, and it might be related to where you have stuff going on up here. The other thing, I think that it's a really interesting, maybe there's a whole story to the spacing of them and the frequency of them, and that might have to do with the calculation of these points that come in. But there's a very nice, like a beautiful moment here where you have like this sort of system of the city, and then you have this thing that's on this slight angle. And at first I thought maybe these points were registering like a difference from the geometry of the city and the geometry of the canal. And it sort of has the opportunity, I guess, to be an instrument that's sort of measuring the difference between the two, or registering those two systems. It almost looks like it's doing that. And so that was just one thing that's just interesting given what you have. And then it might also help the thinking of the sort of city program that comes in, and the kind of, water program that asserts itself in other places. You have this really beautiful sort of idea that keeps coming back that has to do with these reciprocal kind of positive, negative. Like at first you showed a study that were like these bowls, the elliptical bowls, and then now the bowls are like these, these, whatever they are, little hills.
Yeah, inverse.
So I don't know if they need to be bowls, or if you might, pick up register more in the city, which looks like you're doing. I mean, I love the kind of idea that they're almost like mile markers or something, or that they're registering. They just have such a regularity to them. I think you could take that even further. The scale of the rib was also had a question about the actual rib also in the system, partly because it looks like, when you get those, I guess like those steel tubes that are like formed in this, like they're kind of like culverts that have that ridged kind of side to them, and it might have to do with the manufacturing or something else. And So they sort of read like that at an industrial level, but they also kind of preclude, I guess that's the point, like you can't go in here, or like would dogs run through there, or, you know, where it gets narrow, or like, I guess I'm trying to understand the porousness of that. And I do think when they're ribbed, they make it hard to put that bench on, which was mentioned also. I'm just not convinced they need to be ribbed, or could they be ribbed, you know, this way? Like, what's the increment? What's the scale of the unit, I guess? How much do they have to be hyper ribbed versus ribbing spread out, I guess is the question. That might be something to think about in terms of the scale of like a bench, you know, if the scale of that unit changed or something. But anyway, those are my thoughts. It's a nice project.
Thank you. Yeah, those are great points. And you and Ben have brought up some things that have come up in the issues of trying to consider the fabrication of this, that there might be also more variations that kind of portray that a little less of this intense ribbing and might actually alleviate it a little bit more at this scale.
Hey, Evan,
Yes.
there's one thing that in all these projects, were you guys given a constraint of budget?
No.
No. Okay. So anything that you can think of, you could put in your design. Okay. Well, that's what I thought, because someone had mentioned about budget, and I'm like, I didn't think you guys had that constraint. I know the canal itself was a constraint for you, but I didn't think money was. I'll be honest with you. I don't know if I've seen any of the other designs where it looks like fingers are coming out of the canal. I thought that was a cool aspect. At least from an aerial view, I thought that was pretty cool, how you did that. The one, I guess, drawback I had about the fingers, and Patty was trying to describe the corrugated pipe that you use for underground wire moving. I'm not a big fan of corrugation, because it does have that, it has that extreme industrial look to it. So with all the patterns that's at your disposal, I think you could pick almost any pattern you want. Doesn't necessarily have to be corrugation. I didn't know if you had picked that for a reason, or it's just because you like that pattern. But you could have put anything there. As far as the attachment of the benches, there is so many multitude of ways that you can attach those benches, and you could actually even make them out of precast if you wanted to. They wouldn't necessarily have to be out of wood, unless you like the contrast of the concrete and the wood. Again, that to me is an opinion and a choice. As far as the overall, and we've talked a lot about the spaces in between the fingers and the marshes and stuff. You know, you definitely could create a number of different pathways, through there. And I know we had talked about pervious pave early in the semester. You could definitely use some pervious pave paths to go through that, and the pervious pave would help you to drain any residual water that was there as well. And having said that, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I've been in situations where I've been on 1 acre of land, and the way the designer had the paths working through that 1 acre of land, and the vegetation, trees, shrubs, screening, if you will, that they had through there, it felt like, depending where you were at within that 1 acre, like you're in a completely different area. And I mean, these paths would meander all over the place, where you would think that you were walking 15, 20 acres. So, there's a way of adding another dimension to what you've got going on there, and just creating some screening, if you will, between the different areas. But overall, I will tell you, I thought it was a neat design. I liked your fingers look when it came out and you started explaining how that water was coming out of that canal and into the space. I'm not sure I've seen that before. I thought that was pretty cool.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I have to say the same thing. I really like the fact that you're using the water. I mean, I know a little bit about this, but not as much as I should. And it does seem like, yes, that is one of the big problems, is that canal overflows because of all of the water that's coming down it. So for a place for that to spill over and come into there to those fingers, I think is a good design. As far as the corrugated stuff, I've listened to this morning's presentations too, and I don't know, self-cleaning concrete and things that I would ask any of you just to go out to a local boat launch in Lake Pontchartrain and see what wet concrete looks like after a while. It's it's slippery. So I think that's always going to be a challenge. I don't know if it's pressure washers or what it is, but there's got to be something to to use those benches or those seating areas so they don't get nasty. But I do like the design. I think it does fit in with the sort of the industrialness of that neighborhood, that sort of mid-century industrial look. That canal, as ugly as it is, it's beautiful. They don't make canals like that anymore. So
yeah.
So
I agree on multiple facets there. This is kind of something that can become part of, just like the canal is kind of become overgrown with stuff. That's kind of the beauty with a system like this, and kind of responding to that area. And so there's some possibilities of issues with that concrete, but also potentials for it kind of to be something that the nature attaches to.
Evan, following some comments, can you go back to the plan when Patty was? Yeah, so I think it's very smart to change the organizational pattern from the longitudinal, that is very narrow, to the perpendicular. So you avoid that infinite series of theme organization. So when you put this perpendicular system, you are creating kind of a grid, no?
Yep.
And then it's interesting, the comment that Patty was saying about the orientation. I actually think that I don't know why it's not parallel. Your fingers are not parallel to the grid. I'm sure you have discussed that a lot. The downside of that is that the streets are somehow not part of the system, and I think it could be that they could have been part of the system. It could have been one more finger that extends, and in that sense, maybe it would have been a little bit more clear the possibility of your system of being different spacing in between the fingers if needed, no? Or how many of those fingers can be erased if necessary. And for that, maybe it would have been great is to have a kind of taxonomy of spaces, no? A series of tests of what you were asked also a moment ago about program and the programs that are planned in the Lafitte Greenway. If you could show a series of axons of this is how a market would be, this is how a playground would be, this is how a small sports piece could be, no? In a way that you give the kit of parts and you say, where do you want it? Because here I have my chessboard, and you can put the queen and the king and the tower wherever you want, and they have the place, no? But I think you can do it like in a week now, no? It's not contradictory at all with what you are doing. And also an interesting comment is what happens with the aging of this and the water, both for the concrete but also for the surfaces, because you are putting inside water that is not exactly clean. So that of making this marshy vegetation area by default sounds like a great choice. And letting the organic matter nurture, hoping that there's not inorganic and that there are not other things, and that the trash is capturing your fingers. So then maybe the way that you infiltrate the water is not through topping a level, but to be infiltrated through some kind of device in your fingers that makes sure that the solids are kept in the fingers and not in the other. So which would be your repertoire of grounds. So the water, given the condition of that water, those grounds are compatible with the water that goes there and filters or gets deposited. And then how all these ages, no? As a moment ago, Dan was telling you, no? That the concrete, the concrete doesn't look nice with the water. Depending on the water, no, and depending how you design the concrete, no, there are concrete that weathers really nicely and ages really nicely, and there's concrete that does not, depending on the conditions. So that's an interesting way of thinking of how will this perform over the time and how it will age. But really nice, great drawings, and the system is great.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of those things you've brought up and been multiple debates of direction and spacing. Originally, everything was parallel. There was a variation in spacing, but a lot of this was due to legibility and kind of differentiating the water and people. And the kit of parts is definitely something that was next in line, but obviously haven't gotten there.
But maybe just a few diagrams that explains the flexibility of the system, and that what you are showing is an example and not a fixed final picture. Would be probably helpful to explain the adaptability and the flexibility of your project.
Of course. Thank you.
All right, so we've been talking for a while now, and maybe a couple more comments and we'll wrap up. Anybody? All right, thank you, Evan.
Thank you.
And thanks for the critics. All right, so next up, Kat, are you ready or are you still working on fixing your connection?
I'm here. I've been able to hear all of you perfectly, but I'm not. I mean, we can try again. I don't know.
Let's try again.
Yeah. I'm just going to go ahead and share it through the concept board because my file is really large, so that may have also had something to do with it.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's try this again. Okay, can you see me and can you hear me? Or not see me, but can you see my screen? All right, let's try this again. So I'm going, did y'all hear anything that I said about the eccentric units and the vessel and the process?
Well, you might want to start there. And I think you want to get your images a little bit larger.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
right.
better. Yeah.
Okay, so just to cover this again, so at the beginning of the studio, we were designing eccentric units, which were CMUs, and it was just to get a basic understanding of working in 3 dimensions and how light and water could interplay with concrete. Then the next part of the assignment was the vessel, and so to think about how water would flow within or over or through, well, not through, it had to hold, had to be able to hold the liquid, but just how liquid literally interacted with these vessels. And the point of this was to think of something that could also be scaled up into a landscape. And then that led us to the final component, which is going to be deployed within the landscape intervention, and I will explain that a little bit further along. And so we've already discussed a lot about the site. So it's the Lafitte Greenway. It's in between Broad and Bayou St. John. The current conditions of the Greenway are, it's being improved a lot from what it was. I'm from here and seeing it from what it was when I was a kid to now. It's just, I'm really excited about the progress that's happening, but still there is a lot of industrial remains. The canal itself is very much, it's definitely designed just for utilization and not for like enjoyment or aesthetic means. And then also the site itself is very linear. You can see that the bike path and the trees and the lights just all go down a straight line. Also, the former brake tag station has been converted into a pavilion. And also just this weekend, or the past couple of weeks, the new Greenway Plaza has been starting to be installed. One of our alumni just recently graduated, Brandon Sertain. He did the mural here, and so I'm really excited to go and see this in person. So for my considerations of the site, I was really interested in how the Greenway is used as a corridor of transportation, and also just how, while there are seemingly a decent amount of trees in the area, a lot of the ones on the Greenway themselves are very much confined to this straight line. And due to our location in the Northern Hemisphere, all of the shade that is produced by these trees from the sun goes the opposite direction of the bike lane. And so I really wanted to consider how we could have at least some sort of dynamic interplay with the transportation corridor and with the use of trees for shade within the site. I also was really interested in seeing the area in terms of flooding. I know that this area floods very easily, and recently it has taken a lot of water. And so that was something that I wanted to make sure that this corridor, this bike and pedestrian corridor, was able to maintain just be able to be open even when it does flood. And also to make sure that, while the remaining streets are closed off, essentially, like people can still get from one part of the city to the other. I was also really interested to see what happened during Katrina. And so in the Lafitte Greenway, in our particular section, it got anywhere from 2 to 6 feet of water. And so the interventions probably will not be able to help with an event like that, but hopefully we're able to avoid events like that in the future. And so also the Greenway and the surrounding neighborhood that have already going through, already installing a lot of different risk reduction strategies. So in this park right here, there has been a subterranean water storage tank just installed that can hold 1 million gallons of water. There are large drainage pipes that allow this water to, first of all, go into the storage tank and then be filtered through into the Greenway. And when we went to this site, we actually saw these caps. They hadn't been installed yet, but then when I went back a couple of weeks ago, they had been installed, and they're located at 4 different sections. And then also in the neighborhood themselves, they are installing different street interventions just to help slow down the rate of water going into the drains. And so my main concern with my intervention was to just prevent any sort of water runoff going into these neighborhoods and putting more stress on the system, because they would ultimately go back into the canal. Then also, okay, so this is when I started looking at how I wanted to intervene in the site. So this is the main axis through the Greenway. As you can see, it is long, linear, and there's no deviation from it. However, even though this is like the official transportation corridor, there are people use it in different ways rather than like the official bike path. And this is, you can see here just from my observations, people cut through They cut through the trees across the grass and just trying to get to the neighborhood, because this greenway and the canal, they really do cut both sides of, or the two different neighborhoods in half, and it makes it difficult to access one side to the other. Then also you can see here, there is a way to cross, which people do use, even though it is blocked off. And that is a man-made, I'm assuming not legally, maybe it was, bridge that enables people to cross. It is currently blocked off, but in the past people have used it. I do know that at a certain point, the football team from Warren Easton would use this bridge to get to the playground, and this is where they would practice. There are also two other opportunities for bridges on the Greenway, and these are just very industrial, like just for utilization, like for infrastructure. And to be completely honest, they're not very aesthetically pleasing. And so my thought was to add bridges in these three spots, and to be able to incorporate these industrial uses, and just to make it a little bit more of an amenity rather than just your backyard drain. And so here you can see the original axis, but then I would want to increase mobility and circulation in these three points. So while it doesn't connect at every single street, it does increase the porosity of the actual greenway and the canal. And so instead of having the just the straight line going through, I am proposing that we keep this portion of the bike path, but then at this point to slowly cross across the greenway, which one increases connectivity from each side, which helps obviously with mobility, but it also just opens up the space to more people being in more spaces, which definitely would help with safety and just with comfort and being in these places. And so while this larger path would be for bicycles, the smaller path here would be for pedestrians. And I'll show how that's differentiated in a moment. And so after those routes of circulation were established, I wanted to fit the forebays within the circulation routes. And so you can see they're all fit at the river side of the greenway, so that all of the water is diverted further away from the area that it will eventually be pushed up back into the drainage system. From there, I once again fit the next portion, the bioswales, within the shapes of the existing circulation, and I'll show how those are related in a section further down. And then once all of that dirt has been excavated, it could be placed into mounds within the site, and therefore like making it easier and not having to remove all of the dirt. And so here we have the proposed greenway. This would be it in its dry condition. And so you can see that while there is water within the canal and within the forebays, the rest of the greenway is very much green and just a natural park area with more trees and more shade for people that are using the space. This is a section of it, and so once again you can see that all of the water is contained within the forebay itself. There's the connection to the canal, and but the rest of the greenway is dry and able to be used. So then we see here the bike lane where we could have either pavers that are closely packed together that are still permeable, or permeable concrete. And then also you see that there would be two bike bridges that connect, or just pedestrian bridges that connect to the official bike lane. And then we would have the pedestrian path, which would be visually and texturally different than the bike lane, and more permeable and just harder to ride a bike on, definitely. And then the pedestrian bridge here. And so we have reestablished the connection from one side of the canal to the other. This would be the greenway in its fully flooded condition, and I'll show you exactly how much water it's able to hold in a moment. But in this section, you can see, like, yes, we've had the forebay, the water has raised up from its original height, but it has filled up the overflow section. It's traveled through a drainage system into the bioswale on the other side. And this flooded condition can happen in two different ways. The first way is overflow, so that would be directly from the canal, which it would go from the mid-city side to the Bayou St. John side, where it gradually moves from left to right, and you can just see it's slowly filling up from one side to the other. And then versus rainfall, where the areas with the lowest elevation would fill up quickest and eventually fill to the same as the overflow. And so now we go into the capacity. So the forebays themselves hold over 143 cubic feet, which is higher than the requirement by a little bit. Then we can see how the forebays work, where we have a connection to the canal with a grate to prevent grass from going in, a subterranean pipe that brings it into the forebay, and then the flood-resistant plants around the forebay, my component system, which makes up the forebay, ecological interventions within the actual forebay, and then packed gravel just to help with permeability. Then we go to the overflow section. So each forebay has its own designated overflow. Once you add all of that together with the forebay, you've got just over 275,000 cubic feet. You now have a section showing how the overflow works. So at the seams of the components, there's controlled leaks once it hits a certain point, which then goes into the overflow, the original overflow, the slope terrain. Then there's a drain once it hits a certain level, which brings it through a subterranean sloped pipe to the bioswale, and then another drain outlet that has a grate as well. And then this brings us to the bioswale, which brings our total to 435, almost 436 cubic feet. And here we just see a section of the bioswale. So once again, the sloped pipe, the drain, flood resistant plants, and then a sloped terrace, which allows for the water to fill up incrementally. And then the last part of water retention on the site is the runoff, which would be from the mounds. You can see the blue highlighted area. So it's just to help any sort of rain runoff from going out like further into the site. And that brings us to a total of over 450 cubic feet. And here you can just see, this is a section showing how the runoff would work. We've got the a 6-inch depression for runoff from the mound. Then there's cantilevered retention wall that has a weep for drainage. And then where all that dirt went is in the mounds. And so we have the mounds. I guessed at this at first, I just put them at 15 feet. And the volume of those mounds was just over 452 cubic feet. So there's a difference, just a little difference, but like you could just add a little bit of more of this dirt to one of the mounds and it would end up covering the 4,400 cubic feet that was additional. And so you can see the mounds have step terraces at 3 feet intervals, the cantilever retention wall, once again, the wheat for drainage. There's native plants along it. There are shade trees, and then the packed infill from cutting out the forebay, the overflow, and the bioswales. So here we see 2 different methods of how we could build or shape the step mounds. There's options either without concrete or with concrete, but I decided to go with a concrete retention wall just so people would have a place to sit along the edges of the different steps. Then we have the bioswales, which I took photos of well, this is actually from the Lafitte Greenway website, but I took photos of the bioswale areas already on the Greenway, and so we could just repeat those in the new areas. And also the shade trees. So there are a large number of trees that are already on the site, and so if they were disrupted with this intervention, we could hopefully relocate them and not have to actually chop any of them down or bring any new trees into the site. And then we have the forebay, which these are actually photos from the sculpture garden at the Museum of Art. And this is just to give an idea of how they would look in real life. And that now brings me to my components. So on the left, we have my actual main component that it took me a long time to actually get to this point. I went through way too many iterations to get here. But I really wanted to focus on having one main component that had a hinge system that allowed for flexibility. And so, and being able to turn, and it could either go in a lot of different shapes. And while I initially had it at 23 feet, when I was actually putting it into the model and into the sections, I realized that 19 feet would probably work. So I just drew that line just to show that this is where the 19 feet is what I actually included in my sections. And so the hinges or the seams, I created 2 secondary components that are different widths and also have just different capacities for and angling the turns radius, I guess, of how they could be deployed. I was getting inspiration from joint secant, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, piles where they have one main component and then another one in the middle that allows for the system to curve or to go in a straight line or however you want. There are also other joints of this nature where it's just like an I-beam or a kind of bent I-beam, but I decided to go with something that allowed for a little bit more flexibility, at least in my opinion. And so this just shows you a little bit of how this joint system would work. And so they would, oops. Sorry, that image quality is so bad, but yeah, so it just fits within the secondary component fits within the main component, and then it allows it to either go in a straight line, as you can see with these 2 components, or it allows for enough flexibility that it can even make a full circle and make some pretty fun turns within just by having them in different patterns. And then this is essentially it.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
We can start. Kat, great explanation despite the challenges. Congratulations. It's clear that you have brought your engineering undergraduate.
Engineering.
I'm kidding. No, I really appreciate the rigor and the systematicity and so clear process and I just want to add one thing is probably this is the moment in which you add a narrative. So you have 4 mounts, you have 4 forebays, and you have 4 other spaces, no?
Mm-hmm.
And how would you call each of them? How would you now overlay a narrative of space here, no? The forebays are not forebays anymore. They are ponds, no?
Okay.
So now we know how much cubic feet they have, but what's their name? And what is the story of each of them, no? What is the story of each of the mounds? Are they linked to something that happens in the vicinity? Are they a new narrative? Are they places to see something? Are places to think about stuff? What is the novel that you would now explain? Because the public space also needs a narrative and a story. And naming is a good way to start the story, no? How would you baptize each of those spaces? I'll just leave it there. For the rest, I very much appreciate the systematicity and the variations. Maybe in the telling of the story, you could then calibrate a little bit more the decisions of the steps in the modes. You may not need all around. You may prioritize the steps in the sides where you can take a sun bath in the winter, in a day like now, but with very good trees for the summer to stay there. So is this the mound of the discussions? Is this the mound of the meditation? I don't know. You can find many narratives that could help to make the final decisions in, or is a narrative linked to nature and to species, or just to make the last decisions about how you populate and how you imagine people performing here and enjoying the place and having some variations in between these 4. You have 4 variations of everything. So I would love to see the story.
Okay.
That's really nice.
Thank you.
I will jump in. I was thinking about that too, because I feel like, so first of all, it's so great to see such a thorough process, such a clear presentation. I love that you quantified it. I mean, it like works, or you're showing that it works. There's just a lot of levels of this, and it's a great project because of the way it moves through these scales. So, and you guys are handling this huge difference in scale in a really incredible way. So there's a lot of amazing things. And so my comments are building on the idea, I guess, to me, the unit, when you got down to the component, my main question is about its section. And I feel like if you think about it, and maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but I wondered, because you're sort of implementing it like a wall that has this top that opens into these facets at the top of the wall, right? Mm-hmm. As it attaches. And I'm really wondering whether or not it could also have this idea for the facets on the bottom, because there's something you said really early on that was like really poetic about your very first thing you showed with those facets, and you're talking about the light and the water and how they play off together. And when the water was filling your early model, it was kind of, it was sort of really highlighting the form when the water was present. And so I just wondered if there was any thinking sectionally about, these things that make up, a certain kind of edge at the top and that then make up like a section of that basin. So that's one question. And then in that same regard, if you go back up to the plan or the section, I thought also about the mounds, because there's a sort of a tension between the very kind of like the strategy to sort of make an artificial, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but this is like, the grid is this imposed thing, and there's this very clearly man-made, very strong set of lines that you strike across it. In terms of like, we're not going to pretend it's natural, we're going to really stake out these lines. But then it looks almost as if these want to be read in a naturalistic way, the way we can see the kind of topo in a way that looks naturalistic. And I just wonder, but then it sort of clearly steps in a man-made way. So I wonder, it just seems to have this sort of tension or ambiguity in terms of just accepting that it's this artificial thing and playing with the idea of the facets. Like I could see how you might have a nested approach to the idea of the facets where say, in one thing, the slope, like say the slope is more like that on one side, and maybe it steps, to the neighborhood on one side, and it's a big slope,
okay.
And then on the other side, in a next one, maybe it's like doing something else that's funny, or it has to do with, the football team. I love that you show the football team goes from here to here, maybe they cross over and they have to like run up a really steep hill on their way as part of their training, and so then but you know what I mean? The section of this to me doesn't have to pretend to be natural in its sort of looking like it's this natural hill in the middle of the very strong lines. I feel like it could just be really strong, like maybe even concrete or this permeable surface that you're talking about. Because then the very last thing are the trees. And I would love, because that was such an astute thing that you said, here's this path and all the trees are on this side of it and the shadows are going that way. That's just so brilliant. So I want you to close that circle and like imagine these facets. Again, the play of light and water is what you said. And maybe there are these facets and the trees are planted in a way that you really imagine the light through the trees, and in plan, this play of lines across a sloped surface alone could be so beautiful at the urban scale, and then where you walk, how you walk or whatever. So those are all ways that you could help kind of resolve, I think, what feels like a little bit of tension in the way you make the actual hills. So I'm just encouraging you to make the hills in the same spirit as you're thinking of the component and the idea of the facets. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I'm trying to write everything that you're saying down, so I'm sorry I'm not responding.
Yeah, no, you don't have to respond. It's
these
a
are
lot to talk about.
But these are actually topographic monuments that are in the axis of the three streets, no?
Mm-hmm.
If you are in New Orleans, you don't have any view that has a hill at the end, no? And here you will have these three monumental hills that are being the landmarks of these three streets that are interrupted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these might be the highest points in the city if it were ever made. So.
No, I have to say, I really like that too, that there are these three hills, because there are some interesting cityscape views when you go up. I mean, people have seen drone photos, of course, of what it looks like from up there, and it doesn't take much. Or even nearby, there's that place, the Cannery, where there's kind of a strange autonomous zone of people that live in RVs up top there. drive up that ramp one day and go get the view from up there. It's quite spectacular.
Yeah, I think the hills are quite cool, and some of the discussion about the need for the hard edges. I think to get a steep slope is why you would do it, right? So there are other ways to do that through soil structural things that are maybe less intensive than the concrete. But where you need the concrete edges is where you start to have steps or ramps or other things where you're trying to deal with a steeper edge. And so I think using that economically would strengthen the design. But as a diagram, I really like it. I think it's fantastic. And thinking about how people move across that hill and the cross slope ramp against that could be quite powerful. I think that the concrete units, the sort of tessellated kind of structures are really interesting. And I'm having a hard time imagining them in, the rendering kind of shows me a little bit about it, but I'd love to see a view across the water and how they reflect, as stated earlier. And I was trying to find an image to drop in here, which I will as soon as I find it, of there's a fantastic arena in Hampton, Virginia, where we're doing a project that has the same exact form, but it's the arena. So it's a big, huge building with that kind of tessellated, kind of folded facade out of concrete. And it's really quite beautiful.
I'm sorry, what did you say the name of it was?
Oh, in Hampton, it's called the Coliseum in Hampton, Virginia. And it's on a lake, and it's this kind of, it's really beautiful on the outside, but apparently it's not that great inside. But it's a really cool feature against the landscape. So I'll drop a picture in. I'm looking for one right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Ben, you want to?
I'll chip in a few things. I think the analysis is great. I think I'm probably picking up on, or I'm probably going to be responding to a similar thing that maybe Patty was talking about. But I think I just wish the mounds were more considered. I think they just need development. I don't think they're successful yet. And I think that they have an interesting approach, but I think it needs to be more designed. It's very residual, and with that, I think inconsequential. And I think they could have much greater consequence if they were more designed. And so I think it's a really good solution, but not finished.
All right. Okay, anybody have any final comments? Matt, would you like to shift that here and close out the comments?
Well, I'm having a hard time. I'm trying to concentrate, obviously, on the precast side of things, and I didn't say anything to Evan, but it was a great presentation. I was the whole time trying to figure out how I was going to form up those finger joints in the plant and how I could do it cost economically, but that's a whole different discussion. But I'm having a hard. Can you zoom in on these pieces? I'm trying to kind of understand. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, presentation is great. I'm kind of interested. I don't know who the gentleman that said that he's seen a project like this. I'd like to kind of see those photos too. This looks a little bit more elaborate than anything that we've tackled at our facility, but.
Yeah, I wasn't able to actually physically cast these with the hydrocal, so I'm not sure if it's physically possible, just with the curves and the bends. But I did try to make sure that the base was thick enough and long enough that it should be able to support, but it would definitely need to have reinforcement within it, just to be able to, because these are like folded in strange ways, and
right.
So,
yeah.
I would have to I would have to try it out to see if it actually works.
Well, so maybe a tidbit when envisioning these types of pieces that are geometric like this, the industry does, what we call cold pours, and so you attach and separate castings a lot of times when you have different geometries, sort of like a big tall column with a 3-foot leg on it that's at a 45 degree skew. Those are generally what we call cold pours, cast separately, then set up, and then making a secondary cast. And so you start to have to look at the economics, I guess, of that. I mean, I think Dan and I keep talking about the economics of some of these pieces, and to keep the weights, down so they're economical to be able to move around and to ship and things. And so, the idea behind something like this is you would definitely want to get with someone like me in the precast industry on the forefront and really collaborate, ideas of how we could do this and how we could keep it within your budget. Because I think sometimes, we can do it in 3D printing, but, from a standpoint of manufacturing with concrete, there are certain limits. I mean, the industry is growing and we've done some remarkable things, but I think you sort of have to kind of understand a little bit about the process of how we make these molds and things, and it would kind of help you. So yeah, I think that the idea Quintero is trying to say is, reach out to the precaster, and when you get in your design home at some point, and they're great resources, and folks like myself will be happy to help you come up with the design that both economically works and works with your project. But yeah, that's all I have to say. But yeah, I love the presentation. Sorry, I'm with you about having computer trouble. It's during this age, it's frustrating. It's I think we've all grown to understand that. So even in the private sector world.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all of your comments.
Yeah, I want to add one thing to that. In addition to thinking about how you would cast it, you also need to think about how you would deploy it, right? Are these driven into the ground, or are they, are you digging out? And so if you are driving it, then you need a place to drive it successfully without it falling apart on top, right? Or is this a cap on top of a sheet pile? So if you imagine a sheet pile that's pounded in, then this would be something that sits on top of that as a kind of finished piece to that system. So this might not be all, the entire thing isn't precast. It's just the kind of the thing that people see that's coming up out of the ground related to that.
Okay.
Good. All right. Thank you, Kat.
Yeah, I'm glad I was able to present. I was so scared there for a minute. Thank you all.
Very good.
And I did add a photo of the Hampton Arena, which is a odd building and quite beautiful.
Looks nice. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Next is Sophie. Sophie, take it away.
I can't turn on my video on because if not, my internet will go down.
Okay.
And I'm gonna try and present, but I'm having issues as well. But hold on one sec. Share screen. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So for the studio, we started, as you know, with smaller components, and how would that then help us into understanding how we will tackle the greenway. And one of them was an eccentric unit. And for me, I focused on how light and water would percolate in it, and by creating different planes, and those planes then allowing for water to move through. And then it was also it also helped us develop a unit that then will make a hole. And for the vessel, it was more considering how we could capture water and hold it in place for a certain amount of time. And the same thing happened here. It's like I tried to understand how I could, like, with different planes, play with the flow of water and how then that would help me concentrate more water in place. And then going into the Greenway, I was very interested in, I'm not from New Orleans, I'm not, I've visited twice. So I was very interested in knowing what the people that live around the area, what did they do, where did they come from, like their age, to see if that would help me understand what was the need for the Greenway. And one of the things that I noticed is that even though there is not a large amount of children in the area, there is a need for like a leisure place. So with that, I went on into investigating, like as Kat explained, like this is more used as a transit zone, like people just use it mainly to go to work, and how then you can transform the transportation ways to make this more of a stopping place. Also focusing on how the site would flood and like where the water was coming from the most, and how that then would help me understand where to place different components. And that's where when I got to the how I was going to tackle the site. And the first thing that I thought was to break the site into 3 parts, or like 3 components. One was going to be using this existing pavilion that it's already there for a marketplace, then a playground, and then a leisure space for well, the people that are not exactly children that are going to play in the playground. And one of the things that I wanted to focus on the playground was how to incorporate water into it so that they would understand the meaning of the place. And this gross. Oh, here it is. Two of the precedents that I looked into were one of the Cumberland Park in Nashville, Tennessee, and the other one is the Promenade at Metropolitan in Columbia, Maryland, and how they did different components in a site that was narrow like ours, and how they also played with retention areas and playground areas. So we get to my site and how I developed it. So the 3 main areas being the market area, the playground, and the leisure space. And I'm sorry, guys, this is like jumping. Okay, so, and also how those areas would then help me understand where I was going to retain the water. So one of the things was that I decided to do mainly bioswales, and then the retaining, like the largest retaining area, other than the 4 ways that we needed to have, was going to be the playground. I call it the splash playground because it's mainly to do with water, but it's playground. And how I'll be able to retain the total amount of the 450,000 cubic feet. And I'm actually above it because my playground area is so large in the middle. Oh. I don't know if my internet went out or not. But sorry. Okay, So in total, I have 487,000 cubic feet of water. And again, this is mainly because of the main area in the middle as to how large it is. And the other thing was that I wanted to create a space that was not only for children, but also like where parents could like sit, or like people could be, because this is not going to be flooded most of the time. Like, to be realistic, this is going to be dry. So I created steps that were large enough to like lay there, or like just as leisure. And then this is how it looks flooded, and how water would drain through the site, and how hopefully like the water that it needs. And here are sections of how the site would work, like the marketplace that we saw previously here on the plan, and how I also, one of the 4 ways I created mounds that with the dirt that I took from the excavation of the central part of the playground, and how then those mounds would help me also move water through the site and drain it to the areas where it needs to be drained. And another aspect was also, like a lot of people, I also placed different circulation throughout the site, and I divided it because I didn't want the bike path and the pedestrian circulation to be on the same level, mainly because of speed. So I divided the bike lane on top of the canal, and then the rest of the paths are for pedestrian. And this is a close-up of one of the sections of the site with my precast component placed in it, and I'll explain that later. But it's mainly, the component is mainly pushed against the bioswales, just because of how design helps percolate the water into those places. And the design of my precast component comes from the different planes that I was thinking of creating the eccentric unit and the vessel, and how those planes would then help me move water through the site and through the pathways, especially because I wanted to have, even if when it was raining, I wanted people not to to still be able to be on site. And this is how you see how it works on like near the bioswales, where the pavers would be placed. And the idea is that water will zigzag because of the different elevations of the triangulations. Water would zigzag through the pavers, individual pavers, and as seen here, it would either go into the middle areas, depending on how much water there is, or would go straight into the bioswale. And one thing that I did that I'm not really sure that if it's right or not, because I've never done a water playground before, I was looking into different diagrams of how they would function, and how one of my things was like I'm gonna tap the groundwater to have water into the features of the playground, but I didn't want that water to be wasted. So one of the things was that in the drainage system of that playground, I have holding tanks that then serve to irrigate the site, the different sides of the site that need irrigation. But, yeah. Well, this is my cast. It broke. I had to fix it. But it after casting it, it helped me understand a lot of how those ridges would allow for more water percolation if they were to be indented instead of popping out. And that would make it easier also for water to end up in the bioswale. Yeah. I don't know if
Great, thanks. All right, critics.
I have just a question. What is the average size of a New Orleans block around here? Does anybody know? I'm just trying to get my head around the scale. Your scale says it's 100 feet.
100, 300, I don't know. I'm not really sure.
It's about 300.
Okay.
I'm just curious because I'm sort of trying to imagine this, this is the long side of a block, and your plaza is, almost like 4 blocks, wide. And then, anyway, it's very monumental. I think your drawings are really nice. Just trying to get my head around, I guess, the scale, because it's, and I guess that's your whole water retention area, right? So, because also these are houses. We haven't really talked about the city fabric yet, I guess, that much. But some of these houses literally look out over this. Oh, her internet went out. Oh, no wonder. It's quiet. Okay, I'll just wait.
Oh no.
Well, to answer your question there, it's about 300 feet per block face. So like the module's like 330. So you're talking about 1,200 feet long.
Yeah.
Okay, so a New Orleans block, like 300 feet. Yeah, I mean, that's helpful to just kind of get your head around. Block is big area.
Yeah, and the typical house lot is about 30 feet wide. So those houses are about 24 feet wide each if they're double shotguns.
Okay, so we don't know if she's gonna be back. So can we maybe skip ahead? And Charles, do you think you can present?
Yeah.
All right. So we'll come back to Sophie once she recovers. Go ahead.
All right. Okay, y'all see and hear me? Okay, so the title of my proposal is Desire Paths and Dead Ends, Reinforcing Growth in Post-Industrial Urban Landscapes. And I'm definitely using this as kind of a metaphor for what I see as like a perpetual cycle of resistance between mobility and settlement of ecological and anthropogenic systems. And so what you see here is an aerial image that illustrates the scarred paths caused by intense cypress logging over 100 years ago. And you can kind of see a range of regrowth happening if you look really closely. And I think, thinking about this and producing a couple more images, I think a lot of the pressures at the edges of these conditions, right? Paths are created typically in very efficient manners, whether it's water or whether it's people trying to communicate or mobilize. But the pressures of the edges are kind of quiet but also intense. So similarly, interstates cutting through the swamp now. And looking a little bit back at history. So this is a map from 1865, which one shows a a snapshot of the development of the building fabric as it starts to kind of slowly mine a lot of the cypress swamps and drain this to continue developing the area. And what I'm also pointing out is the canal, which was kind of like the path of least resistance for one time. One created a lot of dead-end conditions historically, but the canal itself kind of fell victim to its own part of its own phenomena, in a way where there was a new canal that was created that didn't have to fuss with the bayou, the winding nature of the bayou. And so that much more efficient path started to be used for transporting resources and navigation in and out around the city. I think the interesting opportunity with the Greenway as well, I think a lot of people have talked about it being very confined, but I think relative to a linear park, the width is quite substantial. You know, a lot of these post-industrial linear parks, which were railways, are, you know, anywhere between 30 to 60 foot wide, whereas the Greenway, for over half of its length, is an average of about 180 foot wide. And I think this kind of allows for a high level of productivity, as well as ways to activate the landscape through, you know, how people use it. So this is an overlay of a couple different things. So within that width, there was always a drainage canal. At one point, there was also 3 parallel rail lines, as well as the old Carondelet shipping canal. So that effectively, all of these things ran to the back edge of the French Quarter, which on the left, this overall site diagram, the French Quarter is located planned north. So you can see how the bayou connected to that canal, which ran straight through. You can see the docking area at the end, and how everything really kind of compressed at our site between the bayou and North Broad Street, but started to expand as it grew towards the French Quarter. And what you're also seeing here is an overlay of unpaved roads from 1908, right? So like, I think these industrial landscapes, the opportunities that are emerging now didn't necessarily exist at certain points in time. So I think it's just interesting to think about what the scale of time is in considering how to master plan a site like this, and what types of productive capabilities could actually take place, like I said, in combination to it serving as like a public green space. So what I'm proposing is sort of a semi-lattice that does extend out from the actual site itself. So looking at, I think what a lot of people have picked on as ways to reconnect these streets, the obvious street grid that's broken by the site. So the thought here is that the presence can be extended, whether it's a change in the paving material. Obviously it can be more permeable, but potentially even more textured, kind of like speed bumps. But the idea is that extends out to these boulevards, so that there's some acknowledgement of the development that's happening on the site. And one of the primary programmatic functions of the site is to serve as a cypress tree nursery to help with like a more accelerated reforestation locally as well as regionally. And one of the playful things that I'm proposing is that I'll show how cypress trees are distributed on the site, but there's also an extended new growth. I'm proposing a new growth promenade that essentially shuts down Orleans Avenue at certain periods of time and transport cypress trees down to repopulate the dead end condition of the park, which is now really just a sea of parking spaces and an RV lot. So a couple other things about the proposal. I'm looking at adaptive reuse of the brake tax station, as well as keeping, there's a large warehouse, taking the warehouse down, but leaving the footprint of the building, because it's about 300 foot long. So the idea is that that could, house basketball courts, skate park, things of that nature. Accessible green spaces. There are really 3 spaces extending along the length of the site. And then permeable hardscape and circulation kind of go hand in hand. I'm also proposing a faster, kind of more efficient, elevated paved path over the canal, as well as a path that it's kind of like a long meander between the drier conditions of the site and the wetter conditions. So with the strategy for the water management, and also kind of like the manufactured topography, is to kind of use those rail lines, the spacing of those rail lines, to establish a formal set of channels or canals, really. I think that's an acceptable vernacular, that start off in parallel, but basically collapse and disperse towards the broad end of the site here. So in this direction. And so water is mainly entering at high peak flood conditions. Water is entering at this end of the site. And the forebay is essentially kind of like an exposed system that would need to be routinely maintained. But I'm also suggesting that's kind of a celebrated quality of the proposal. And at those high peak flood periods, once maintenance needs to be performed, the bridges that allowed for connectivity across the site become disconnected. So you can see a diagram down here that's segmenting these pedestrian bridges and allowing them to move across the open forebay spaces to service and maintain them. So that's kind of like a recurring thing, just kind of elevating the visual quality of it and building in that like ritual to the site, knowing that, it's something that's going to have to be done frequently. So a little bit just locally about the way that the cypress planting will work. I'm proposing that half of the brake tax station is dedicated to this production, adjacent to the green space. And I think similar to one of the things that Kat picked up on earlier, the first phase of new growth would be to align on the more appropriate side of that circulation path for shade, and then slowly plant and build out towards the canal, because this area of the site is the wetter condition, and it slowly, you can see down here, sorry, this is the wetter condition, and the site slowly elevates towards the Broad Street intersection. So this is kind of like a representation of that process. So this shows the forebay condition, the origin point of the cypress seedlings, and how new growth happens along a linear path. But the idea is to really think about this in a much more long-term manner. And just kind of picking up on interesting, like the fact that given the species bald cypress is, it really only represents 5% of the entire urban forest in New Orleans. And on the right again here, this is just kind of an illustrative idea of that promenade, being able to move trees down the street, stop traffic, celebrate, plant those at the end. And you could also easily see other grids introduced into the city. So looking now, this is kind of like a plan detail of that corner. And I was really just putting a lot of energy thinking about the quality and nature of this over time, you know, knowing that it is not necessarily a pristine condition at all. But these are the three armatures that allow for overflow to come into the site. These are those parallel canals. And you can see this is a semi-flooded condition, but the idea is that there are these armored channels within these canals that act as the energy disbursement for the forebays and allow for debris collection. So the two sections as well are cutting through that outfall condition where water is coming in. The section cutting through kind of the typical conditions of those three parallel forebay canals and the segmented armored quality. And then this is a longitudinal section showing kind of the sequence of how that forebay works, as well as the elevated pedestrian bridge that becomes disconnected periodically. So haven't rendered in a long time, but took some time to have a physical site model milled just to try and capture what it would look like, obviously in a flooded condition, and just experimenting with sand and fine mists to see how things would kind of settle over time. So these are just details of that, looking at some of the different microtopography explorations. And then these more kind of like vignettes being at the points of those bridge crossings. So looking a little bit closer at the forebay canal armors, developed this a little bit further to have a subtler texture that kind of suggests another level of sediment collection and energy dissipation. And we have some pretty awesome tools now. So this is a plugin for Grasshopper that allows you to simulate water flow. It's really as if you can just pick sampling points, and it's what happens if water is falling straight down. It shows you the path that it moves. So these are just 3 different levels of resolution, but you can these inverted points, the vectors start to really collect in those areas. And some 3D prints at a small scale. And then this is I should have added a scale so you can see, but this is it's a 1-to-1 texture mock-up that was poured, just testing out, how the resolution of this texture would come through. Then the design for the elevated pathway over the canal, I'm proposing that's essentially a pre-stress hollow core slab, and that to kind of think about the guardrail condition as a deep semi-lattice, because the canal is so wide. It's it's about 24 foot wide. So you can have a deep edge condition while still maintaining a 14 to 6 foot path for 2 lanes. And then the last idea here is to think a little bit more about the process of hollow core slab construction, because it seems like there's always a topping slab poured on the hollow core afterwards. So trying to think about ways to eliminate a step and introduce a texture. So it's typically extruded. So I'm proposing that large scale stamps can be used to roll over the surface of the slabs as they're curing, which then can be post-processed. And the idea here is that you could swipe in some materials that could help with using UV light for illumination. So here's my radical idea for kind of being able to inject something into the surface of that allows for a more uniform illumination at nighttime. And that's it.
Cool.
I can go back at any point.
Well,
Critics?
Charles, I guess I'll start. I'll comment on the precast side of things at the end. Certainly, go back to, there we go, the hollow core. So obviously you've been to a hollow core plant before, right, Charles? I guess.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting. Yeah, I like your idea. Interesting enough. And not maybe even Dan's not aware. The Boykin brothers, who are part of the PCI Gulf South, did the sound barriers as you enter New Orleans. The stamped sound barriers. And their concept behind that was wet cast, not hollow core, but they actually had a machine that stamped the back, sort of almost, kind of like a wave. So similar to your concept, it's been done before. It's interesting that you kind of brought that up. Yeah. But very, very interesting. You're the first person today that has brought in hollow core. Which is a very economical solution to what you're trying to do, and so very interesting. So describe after the stamp now.
Well, the idea is that if you create a deep texture,
right?
Like a deep texture is not conducive for certain types of travel, right, or potentially accessibility. So the idea is that how could you then infill that so that it's closer to being smooth again, but the material is different. So the same way you would kind of like ink etch or something, or that's the idea.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool. I like the idea.
Just a quick note about the precast. We looked at a similar approach when we were doing the Lafitte Blue Way design, because the Sewage and Water Board said we could cover it, but you needed to be able to remove them so that if they needed to, I don't know, pull a car out of the canal, they could do that. So that was the one input from the Sewage and Water Board, that they agreed that covering the canal was feasible, as long as it was had access points. So doing precast panels there makes a lot of sense. I was going to ask for a little bit more clarity on the bridges thing that move. I'm kind of it's the idea that there's rails that then you would almost like gantry cranes that move across.
Yeah, they wouldn't be. It's a little underdeveloped, but the big idea is that it's revealing the maintenance process, or it's kind of foregrounding the maintenance process when it's happening. So yes, the way that it would work is the ridges of these would have tracks in them, sketched out, but I think these are hollow core slammed in the other direction. But the idea is that you could basically ride on one of these. These are 15-foot wide, 30-foot long by about 8-foot deep. So a pretty sizable platform. So that's the idea, that personnel could basically move over, use that. There may be some other rigging system that's used to retrieve or vacuum. But the idea is that the path is broken in these extreme conditions.
Very, very interesting proposal, Charles. And I like the way everything it is very concrete and industrial in those ways. And I think that's kind of an interesting sort of use of of that space in that environment.
Hey, Charles.
Are you about to talk, Ben, or should I jump in?
I'll try. Hey, Charles. This is great. I mean, what's really fun to see on this is all the layers that you sort of have considered for it. And so everything from, the micro level of the texture of the concrete surface to, the way that trees get brought into the area to repopulate, a cypress forest and what that would do to the city. So, I mean, I think like there's all these layers and all of these stories that are being told through the project. And it's just really exciting to see that. So, congratulations. I mean, that's a lot of work. The maybe one thing that I'm struggling with it just a little bit, I think, and I love the drawing, like it's the enlarged plan. And I'm just trying to get a better sense of the holistic sort of scheme, and I think I'm reading it right, but like there's just a lot of layers there.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to wade through the kind of the graphics and the content to sort of make sense of what's been designed, what's there, what's sort of in sort of the state of flux. And I think as a drawing, it's really successful. But as sort of a technical drawing, I wish there was like a technical drawing that was sort of describing the plan at the origin of its inception and maybe at the later stage if there's sort of this time lapse to it. But, and then maybe the last thing I'll mention, I love this. And this is the first time I've seen your work, for I think a couple of times now. So, but this is the first time I've seen the lights in the sidewalk, and I think it's fantastic. I mean, the top plan view, it's like, holy crap. I mean, like maybe we'll have to tone it down a little bit.
Right.
Like,
that's right when the sun sets.
But I love the perspective though is stunning. And so I started just imagining what all that could be, as an event space, as just something exciting in the city. And I have no idea how plausible that is. Like, it seems as though it is, like you presented it in a way where I believe you, but I think something like that has a lot of opportunity. So it's really encouraging and exciting to see that kind of exuberance that can go into this, where it's this precast system, but then how do you kind of add on to that as an idea, as a thing, as a statement, as more than infrastructure, and that it gets really compelling at that level.
I agree. I think it's a really sophisticated project on a lot of levels, and maybe this is just because we read this in my seminar, but I don't know if you follow Neil Brenner at all. He talks about the traditional city as we know it, and our need to kind of move away from how we conceptualize, quote, the urban, always this inherited form of this traditional city, and really consider what he calls like the more operational landscapes of the kind of larger global capitalist system that have to do with, when you showed the cypress logging tracks, there's this whole economy, and that has its own geography of landscapes, that are often, degraded landscapes or extreme, mining sites, all of these kind of sites that we never really see, but that they support the city behind the scenes, the kind of backstage. So I find that view in time and that sort of larger footprint of thinking really interesting and provocative. And I wonder, and then at the same time, I think there's a strength here because you're thinking ecologically, again in time, and again of the city or the site as part of a process, which is part of how we move away from the city as a kind of static inherited, form only, and start to think of it as part of these processes that are, economic, that are about the flows, that are about all of these other things. So I think there's a lot of directions this is going. And I think part of the comment about understanding the whole system is you almost have to draw it like a process drawing, like draw it as a system and draw it in time as a way to capture the cyclical nature of it over, because I mean, one of my first questions was like, how long does it take a cypress tree to get to whatever height it needs to get to? Are they slow growing, or are they, they're not like bamboo, where you can just keep, I imagine they're like really long and slow. And so, you're talking like 50-year turnover, much slower, different kind of cycle. And I would love to see that time frame up against these other time frames that have to do with, daily circuits and moving through the streets and the flood, the kind of seasons of the flood and those things. So I think so here's a couple comments, if I'm understanding everything correctly. One is on this view, it doesn't make sense that you would that the system, it's like a system, but then it's lobbed off and it's just contained. I know that's your quote site, but I think in this case, you made the pink goes across, the yellow goes across, this goes all the way to the water and it goes all the way to whatever that, doesn't it go to City Park up here or on the other side? Or
it ties into the bayou, which runs up alongside. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to the bayou. So at least it runs, at least it has to run to the edge of the aerial, here. And I know that's not the charge, but just as a concept, I think that's what you're thinking, is that this should be a system, a citywide system, just like this is. And I love the kind of, I don't think it's audacity. I think it's actually a sort of a responsibility to take, to think about the streets and think about the way that this could have I guess, play out more broadly on the streets. Because number one, the streets are one of the few public things left, in addition to this, which I think you guys said is publicly owned. But the streets being public, they're like a set right of way that are there. So, and it's also, that is the static kind of traditional and inherited conduit of the city. And so to bring that together with this sort of new cypress kind of overlay quasi-industry, I mean, I'm imagining, you're saying you replant them. They have a kind of ecological value now. It's not that you're growing them and selling them like a cypress farm, right? They're getting moved to where they need to go. Actually, can they move? Don't they have like an incredible root structure?
Well, they would be moved as small plants. They're basically like 4 to 5 foot tall. So they'd be potted first and then transported in that manner.
So one thing I've been thinking about with not just your project, but a couple of the other projects also, was the compatibility of growing things in this channel and alongside the concrete. I know the concrete people are probably like, that's like a no-no. You think of the sidewalks in the neighborhood where the roots of the trees bust up the concrete slabs of a sidewalk. So I feel like they're not compatible, but at the same time, I wonder if what you really want to do is plant the cypress trees along here and think of a concrete, or think of your system that somehow is able to coexist with that natural system that roots in, because your guardrails are so cool on that. The section of the lattice guardrail is very cool. And that to me reads like the roots. Like, I want to see an image of the tree. I want to see a drawing that slices and shows like the structure of the tree and how it grows and how the roots are so visible and prominent and how they anchor. And I think there's even more you can draw from the roots, and maybe even have those trees here as part of this, and kind of really think 100 years from now, how is this going to actually be a quasi-living thing. I feel like that would be good for the system. So your project makes me think of all those things. I don't know if that made any sense, but it's really got a lot of these nuggets that are very worth thinking about in terms of infrastructure and the future of infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to add, I jumped straight to details early, but I appreciate the larger view of the city and the history and the perverse upside down plan where you put the French Quarter at the top of the drawing. But you know, the history of this corridor as the place that all the logged trees were, you know, carried down from the middle of the city and the swamps to build New Orleans. I think inverting that and making it the corridor for the reforestation is quite interesting. I do wonder though if it's the, you know, I guess the little trees make sense here, right? But the big tree, you know, growing the trees to a larger scale would make sense to me in a, or the sort of large scale planting and where they're going to end up in the future would be maybe somewhere else in the city. So maybe thinking again, another level of diagram of where the places around town that this would benefit, right? So that the other projects, the other sites, that the empty spaces in the city that we could reforest. One of the reasons why we have so few bald cypresses in the city is because they're effectively banned. You can't plant them in the street because their knees tear up the street and they tear up the street. So so pond cypresses people plant in the streets, but I mean I planted 3 bald cypresses in my backyard, and the sort of vessel that I have for water storage is intended to be a little nursery for cypress trees. We just haven't implemented it yet, but they can live in vessels, right? So they can be in an oil drum for a while, or a 55-gallon barrel. So maybe, I mean, I was kind of surprised from your narrative that's not what you did your concrete thing as, you know, the vessel for growing the trees, or for holding them in the site, because they can be considered a module, the trees themselves. So.
Definitely.
But yeah, it's really cool project, and lots of levels that were quite interesting. I am interested though in this drawing. Sorry to be picky. You can handle it. The Gentilly Ridge.
Yeah.
That line, is that representing that's the Esplanade Ridge? And I'm thinking, right?
I think you're right. I think I have.
So that's the high ground. That's indicating the high ground, the edge there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, picky, but.
No, it's okay. I appreciate that.
Aren't cypress trees native to this area because they live in water? I mean, aren't they good? Aren't they good for the environment and for waterlogged places? And
yes.
I mean, I push back on yes, they're illegal, but that's because, you know, paving rules the world. But what's our future? I think this needs to provoke that and, you know, find a way to coexist, because I don't think the paving's gotten us where we need to be.
I agree. I agree 100%. And to answer your question about how fast they grow, they actually grow really fast. So you can, the ones in my backyard, when I planted them, they were maybe 10 feet tall, and now they're 40 feet tall, and they've only been there about 5 years. So they grow very fast, and they love our soil. So they're pretty weedy actually once you get them going, as long as they're protected. The challenges they have when they plant them out in the wetlands is that the salt water and the other invasive species will shade them out. So that's why this forestry, kind of approach is necessary, managing. But yeah, we need to convince the city to plant them. People are doing it though. People still plant them. There's a great stand of them, like a row in Garden District, where there are about eight of them in a row, and they're really beautiful. They like being close together as well, not spread out like oak trees. They can be 10 feet apart, and then they start to become like one tree.
Charles, I'm not sure if I can say anything. It's spectacular. If you can help me to understand a couple of things, because there are, I think Ben has mentioned, at some point there's so much richness in some of the sections that is hard to understand how it works with all the textures. And can you help me to understand what happens with the adjacencies? How people move from one point to the other, if that's possible? What are the interactions between the areas? Because the canal, the walk on top of the canal is a very long walk. So how do you move out from the canal, do something, come back, cross? How these adjacencies work?
Sure. It's essentially, it coincides with these 4 street intersections. So there are 4 points about a block apart that allow for connectivity. Other than that, this path is continuous. Then this diagram. Then essentially there is a path that moves through the center of the space along the edge. And the idea is that the lawn, this is more of a flat programmable functional lawn space. And then there's just another continuous circulation route along the perimeter of the site. So, I think one of the other layers is just that idea of desired paths again, which seem to kind of be a nuisance in traditional park planning, where people are going to kind of do what they want. So certainly part of my thoughts to focus on really like kind of 2 primary circulation armatures, but then there would be a lot of flexibility beyond that. So,
is it possible to walk in between these fringes?
Towards the back half of the site, yes. It's hard to tell, but it's slowly, it's wetter on one end of the site and it's incrementally stepping up. So really, it's just the first third of the site, which is probably typically wet, but the rest of the site, it's taking that same language, but eventually becomes a positive condition. So yes, you can circulate through slightly drier conditions on the back 2/3 of the site.
Yeah, I was just wondering if people could interact more in the wet side as well, but yeah. Is there a chance or not? Because you have this microtopography that allows you to control the swamp condition of that area in a geometric way, no?
Well, I guess I guess part of what I'm arguing is, how much, if 50% of the site is accessible, is that enough, right? Like one of the things I am preserving is a paved hardscape extending out from the brake tag station, knowing that would potentially function as a market. And I guess I would take the position that needing to move out, this is going to be wet and kind of yucky, and it's going to have a good bit of trash in it from time to time. So like, I guess I am kind of arguing that I'm preserving this portion of the site to not be occupied by humans, because that's like the beginning of that manufactured wetland area. So for viewing pleasure only. I mean, you could.
Okay.
One question I have is, no one has talked about whether animals exist in this water or around this water, or is it moving too quickly? Like, does it rush through this thing, hence it needs to be more channelized, or do fish get in here, or is that like a really dumb question?
Well, my concern about animals would be more mosquitoes than fish. It's more of standing water. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I think that these three canals, they're about 15 foot wide. There probably would need to be some cross communication, so it makes a larger wetland network. Like they're probably a little too constrained as they currently exist. But I think typically there would need to be some type of pump system to move water in some ways, and I'd be interested in exploring something that's not just the typical fountain in the middle of the water, but not quite sure how that works, to be perfectly honest with you on this site. But these canals may be a little too constrained to promote like enough diversity, or make sure it doesn't just become overpopulated by mosquitoes.
Well,
Another challenge.
I ask because this kind of micro topography of the bottom, the sort of variegated bottom, made me think of the river in San Antonio, which I think most of it has a channel, but it actually has these little sunken pockets in it. And they told us it was because they have to periodically drain it for maintenance. And when they drain it, it gives the fish, it sort of leaves these pockets of water that gives the fish a place to go. And so there are different animals that go to different levels of the water, and some might be flushing through, some might actually live there. I don't know. I think it would be interesting to think about, because you have the cypress trees and you're
right.
taking a kind of longer term ecological approach to think about, is this some sort of habitat for anybody? Or shouldn't it be if it's not?
Right.
Yeah, the larger fundamental question here is, is it connected to the bayou as a water feature that has permanent water that's flowing and is a natural system, or is it just a stormwater reservoir detention basin that the water leaves, after a short period? Because you really don't want it to stand for more than 48 hours unless you have a circulation moving through there. The canal that's there always has water in it because it's so deep. It has groundwater in it all the time, and you occasionally see ducks and minnows and creatures and stuff down in there, the deep one. But I think we looked at when we connected to the bayou in our scheme, you had to go down and maybe another 5 feet deeper than what you guys are proposing. And so you can easily connect to the bayou and use that as a source and have a cascade, or you have a cascade where the water is flowing in always from the bayou, which is what we were proposing.
All right. Anybody have any sort of ending comments for Charles? Good. Thank you.
No.
Okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask what's next. I mean, I know like your thesis.
Well, we can pivot to conclusive remarks from the critics. Yeah. And just before we do that, Sophia asks that please email her with her if you all have any comments. She can't get her internet system back up, so it's on the chat. If you could give her some feedback, that will be great. But yeah, let's kind of pivot in maybe overall general remarks about the studio investigation, the comments, impressions, so on and so forth. Start with Ben.
I mean, Kentaro, I've seen variations of this studio now for a couple of years, and it's really remarkable to see the level of kind of research that goes into the subject matter. And so just seeing how it's evolved over the last few years has been really wonderful as, like a colleague. So it's exciting on that level alone. I think where I get most kind of encouraged is when I see the students being able to grapple with multiple scales at the same time. So the grain of, and this is sort of, I was mentioning on Charles's, but I think everybody is doing this on a certain level. And I think that's like an underlying sort of motive of the studio. So how do you address an urban scale issue? How do you address the grain of what I touch on my feet? And so all of that is in play here. And I think the most successful projects, you know, really take that on and have varying degrees of response to each of those issues at the different scales. And I know like it's impossible on some level to be able to manage that in a semester long class when it's new material.
You need 2 semesters, really.
Yeah. And, you know, so I think in some ways the students have to pick and choose the battles, right? And then figure out what the best sort of resolution, so to speak, for that kind of battle is. And, you know, again, it's really exciting to see it. And the students had really in-depth sort of knowledge about just water management in general in a city. And, you know, that's incredible. I really can't speak to that on a professional level, you know? And so, you know, it's exciting to see that kind of development in their work. So thanks for having me. And congratulations, everybody.
Almost done. Almost done.
I'll go next here. I gotta say, I really enjoyed today's presentations. I agree. It's quite amazing to see the scope of these projects and just the different levels that all the students have thought about. You know, with the large scale and urban, also down to the scale of the textures of the materials and such. You know, my overall comment on this, coming from my perspective, is, you know, I go back to that concept of the master plan, and I'll tell everyone on this call that you know, my organization is seen a steady stream of developers and architects coming and knocking on our door over the past couple of years about this entire piece of land, and I like to say that they've become more and more sophisticated and expensive as time has gone on. The most recent one was a 200-unit apartment complex on the Greenway. So having said all that, I welcome any and all of these ideas, because none of these included any high-end apartment complexes. and you know, ultimately this is a greenway and a public park, and there is this master plan that was made long before the greenway existed. And our organization right now is talking to the city about whether we, you know, revisit that, whether we build it as is. That brake tag station is there. You know, the farmers market's moving there in some ways, but we don't know what. And then there's all those other buildings, and who knows what will happen with those. So again, I thank all of you for this. It was very, very helpful for me to sort of see this, and I welcome you know, some way that I can sort of share some of these ideas with I don't want to say the general public necessarily, but just like people in my organization, just to say like, hey, this is, you know, this is what people are thinking about. This is the future of our city, and I think that's very important, and I'm very proud to be a part of this. So thanks again.
Who's
I'll
next?
go next.
Rami? Yeah.
I can go next.
Thanks.
So is one of your outcomes of this, just to that point, creating like a one pager for each of the projects? Because that might be a helpful way to communicate this. You know, I love the concept board and seeing everything, but you know, how do you distill one of these projects down to, you know, what's the big idea? So that, you know, Kevin could make a presentation to his board about this great work that y'all have put together. But yeah, and I echo the comment about the scales. I mean, I think that thinking about these large urban systems and how this really complicated and unique kind of space, you know, so important to the history of the city, and is kind of unknown by most people in the city. I mean, people now know the Greenway, but you know, the fact that it was the back door to the city, or really the front door to the city, the old canal that used to be there, the fact that the right of way for the canal is still there, and you know, it could maybe come back someday. I'll still hold on to that dream. But the, you know, grappling with that, but then also getting down to the scale of the, you know, the concrete member. I do think that as you think about precast and the opportunity to work with this material, you know, how it's implemented, you know, what is I'm sure you all did some research into how you actually use precast concrete in a project. You know, how the foundation works and how it gets put into place leads to the design, you know, how it's actually cast, and, you know, all of the kind of technical parts of a precast lead to its aesthetic and the limitations of the materials. So I think that this is a really fruitful ground for study at multiple scales. So good job, everybody.
I'll second that. It's always fun to come to New Orleans, so thank you. And it's nice to look at New Orleans through the screen. But I appreciate being a part of this, and the scales. I think you guys did a really great job working across these scales and being at home, and some of you having the shop. I mean, I know it's like we're talking as if it's a normal studio, and yet nothing is normal. So I think, you know, the work has so much merit and really interesting projects, and I really enjoyed seeing them. And I think the last project was a nice one to end on, because it kind of returns to the idea that that the original canal was part of a system. And, you know, when you think about people, what are people going to do here? How is the water moving through? There's all of these different cycles and flows and systems. And a lot of you are touching on different parts of that. And I think as long as you keep thinking that way, that's where the projects have a lot of, I guess, are the most fruitful in how they fit in. But also from the level of the detail of the concrete, like how is it holding the water at the close in scale, and then how does that kind of same thinking sort of change up at the urban scale? I think as a system, you can have a kind of nested idea of systems that you work with, if that makes sense, from the detail all the way to the project. And it has to do with how it's working at the different scales. So I feel like you guys are really touching on a lot of that, and just congratulations.
Congratulations. Iñaki?
Yes, I feel very, very uplifted. So thank you for having me. I think this is very serious, and there's a level of depth and complexity that is, well, all of you have touched before. So I was thinking that this work has a combination between the individual and the collective that is very interesting, and it's very different to how we work in the projects of Delhi or Rajasthan, as Kat and Evan, for instance, will know, or Andrew. We work in a kind of divide and conquer. So in our case, we look at different issues of the city. We put the things together, we discuss, and then people take individual responsibility in testing certain ideas in certain places. And this process is very different. And it's much more kind of collective development of knowledge through individual investigations that are very artfully choreographed. Congratulations for that orchestration of those investigations. So this work of 12 people in parallel, it's creating a kind of collective knowledge through, I'm sure, a lot of exchange among each student and learning together, but through individual development that I find fascinating. And the idea of the one pager of the project that Ramiro was proposing, I was thinking, how would I understand all this collectively now? And that's one possibility. Or the other possibility I would also like to see is what is the summary of the findings? What are the pieces that each project have found that can go to the next level, as opposed to understanding each project as a kind of closed piece, no? And which are the families of solutions or the families of investigations that can be extracted from this. And I cannot put my head around this. I just have the intuition that that's something that is there, and I would like to see and understand.
We will work on that. I mean, yes, I totally understand what you're saying. Let me work on that. Matt? Sorry to put you on the spot, but perhaps you, if you could give us
that's
a...
fine. Of course, if most of you see, you can see my screen in the background. Being at the plant all day long, being interrupted, I apologize. But this is my first time as being a critic, and as I echoed, I guess, my comments earlier for who weren't there, Jackson Precast, our facility here in Jackson is sponsoring the studio at Mississippi State next year. So, I was really interested to see Quintera's program, and thanks for including me. Tulane, I am an alum, as most of you know, been listening to me all day long from the civil engineering department years ago. And I'm happy to be involved in anything Tulane related. It's hard for me to be a critic, I guess, today, because there was such wonderful work here. I mean, it's hard for me. I could see all the time and effort, and everyone sort of took a different angle. I appreciated Charles' approach, the historical, I really enjoyed seeing that. I like what you're doing, Quintero. It's exciting to see these wonderful ideas around precast. Like I mentioned this morning, I got heavily involved in the PCI Foundation through my board position within the precast industry, precast pre-stressed concrete institute, which now I'm as secretary treasurer. And it came to me in that involvement that there's so many things that young minds just didn't understand about precast. I think Charles can attest to that through his time with the studio early on, and working with precasters and understanding how we can help you throughout the process. And I think that's one of the things that our industry doesn't do enough of. And if I could stress a couple things, I've said it today, is the collaboration through the design, through the architect, getting the precaster involved early and helping you with some of these concepts where you have all these wonderful ideas, but at some point we have to manufacture them. And I think the precaster can be a great assistance. Also, the construction manager, we all want to build things, and sometimes the contractors of the world don't think we can do it, but a lot of times we can. And so, don't be discouraged by someone saying it can't be done. Come find the precaster. We'll help you figure out a way to get it done. And so, if I could end by saying that, I hope the next time that I'm in New Orleans, as a critic, being there live, so I don't get interrupted. But it wasn't because I wasn't interested. I would like to have sat here all day long and asked questions. But thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. All right, so we'll talk about the one pager. That's a good idea, but as I don't think anybody want to hear about it at the moment, so we'll follow up on that. And students, they're all graduate students in their advanced second year or third year. It was great working with you all, and we will follow up. Charles doing his own thing with an advanced degree, and all the stuff also ties into his thesis, which is about public nature of streets. So we'll see how that develops in the next semester. Anyway, again, thank you so much, you all, and hope to see you again. We'll keep you posted, and we'll stop here for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you all again, and come out to Supernova next week on the Greenway. Check.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good job, guys. Bye, guys. Thank you, Patty.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye. Thanks, Matt.